The church bells tolled like a warning, their echo slicing through the quiet of Willow Creek, Virginia, as Elena slipped out her bedroom window. Her heart pounded, not from the climb but from the secret she carried, a love that could burn her world to ash. By the time her sneakers hit the grass, Sophie was already waiting, her silhouette sharp against the fading sunset. Elena, 24, had always been the good daughter, the one who memorized Bible verses and sang in the choir at First Light Baptist. But tonight, her faith was in Sophie, 26, the woman who'd crashed into her life like a comet, beautiful, reckless, and forbidden. Sophie leaned against her beat-up motorcycle, her green eyes glinting with a mix of mischief and longing. "You sure about this, church girl?" she whispered, her voice low, teasing, but laced with something deeper, fear maybe or hope. They'd been meeting in secret for months, stealing moments in the town's hidden corners. The abandoned mill, the creek behind the cemetery, anywhere the eyes of Willow Creek couldn't reach. Willow Creek was small, devout, and unforgiving. The church, led by Pastor Reynolds, preached love but wielded judgment like a blade. Elena's mother, Margaret, was the pastor's right hand, a woman whose sharp tongue and sharper convictions kept the congregation in line. To the town, Margaret was a pillar of virtue. To Elena, she was a wall, unyielding, cold, and fiercely opposed to anything that strayed from God's path, especially the sin of two women in love. But Elena knew something no one else did. Her mother's hatred wasn't what it seemed. It started 6 months ago, the night Elena confessed to Margaret. She'd sat at the kitchen table, hands trembling, and whispered, "I love her, Mom. I love Sophie." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret's face had hardened, her eyes narrowing as she spat. "You're confused. This is a sin, Elena. You'll destroy yourself and this family." The words cut deep, but it was the fear in her mother's eyes, not anger, that haunted Elena. It was as if Margaret was fighting something bigger than her daughter's heart. The next day, Margaret had marched to the church and joined the loudest voices condemning unnatural lifestyles. She organized prayer circles, quoted Leviticus, and warned the congregation about the dangers of straying. Elena overheard her mother at a church meeting, her voice cold as she said, "We must protect our children from this corruption." The words stung, but Elena caught a flicker of something in Margaret's posture tremble, a glance toward her daughter that wasn't disgust but desperation. Sophie pulled Elena close now, her leather jacket cool against Elena's skin. "Your mom's gonna lock you in a convent if she catches us," Sophie murmured, half joking. Elena laughed, but it was hollow. She wanted to tell Sophie the truth, the suspicion that had been growing in her heart, that her mother's hatred was a performance, a shield to protect her from the church's wrath. But how could she explain something she barely understood herself? They walked deeper into the park, hands brushing, hearts racing. The air smelled of damp leaves and coming rain. Sophie stopped by a willow tree, her expression softening. "I'm not good at this, Elena," she said, her voice breaking. "I've never felt like this before. Like I'd burn this whole town down just to keep you safe." Elena's breath caught. She wanted to say it back, to promise forever, but the weight of Willow Creek pressed against her chest. A twig snapped nearby and they froze. Footsteps crunched through the leaves. Elena's pulse spiked. Had someone followed them? The church had eyes everywhere, and Pastor Reynolds had been preaching about cleansing the flock lately, his sermons growing darker, more pointed. Elena grabbed Sophie's hand, pulling her behind the tree. The footsteps faded, but the fear lingered. "We can't keep doing this," Elena whispered, her voice trembling. "Sneaking around, lying. It's killing me." Sophie's jaw tightened. "Then let's leave. Tonight. You and me will ride out of this hellhole and never look back." Elena's heart leapt at the thought. Freedom, Sophie. A life where they could love without fear. But her mother's face flashed in her mind, that strange, haunted look. What was Margaret hiding? Why did her hatred feel like a lie? Elena squeezed Sophie's hand. "I can't. Not yet. There's something I need to understand." Sophie's eyes searched hers, hurt but trusting. "Whatever it is, don't take too long. I'm not losing you to this town." That night, Elena climbed back through her window, her mind racing. She needed answers. She crept downstairs, where Margaret sat at the kitchen table, a Bible open in front of her. But she wasn't reading. Her hands were clasped, her knuckles white, and her eyes stared at nothing. "Mom," Elena said softly. Margaret flinched, her face snapping into its usual mask of control. "What are you doing up?" Margaret's voice was sharp, but her hands trembled. "I need to know," Elena said, stepping closer. "Why are you doing this? Why are you fighting so hard against me?" Margaret's lips parted, but no words came. For a moment her mask slipped, and Elena saw it again, that raw, unspoken fear. Then Margaret stood, her chair scraping the floor. "Go to bed, Elena. You don't know what you're asking." But Elena did know. She just didn't have the pieces yet. The next morning, Willow Creek buzzed with its usual Sunday rhythm, families in pressed clothes streaming toward First Light Baptist, hymnals tucked under their arms. Elena sat in the front pew, her mother beside her, both playing their roles. Margaret's face was a fortress, her posture rigid as she nodded along to Pastor Reynolds' sermon. But Elena noticed her mother's hands, folded tightly in her lap, betraying a quiet tremor. Pastor Reynolds' voice boomed from the pulpit, his eyes sweeping the congregation like a hawk. "We are at war, brothers and sisters," he declared, his voice dripping with fervor. "A war against sin, against those who would corrupt our children with their unnatural desires." The congregation murmured in agreement, but Elena felt the words like a fist to her chest. She glanced at Sophie, who sat in the back row, her leather jacket out of place among the floral dresses and starched shirts. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment, a silent promise amid the storm. After the service, Elena lingered in the church hall, watching her mother move through the crowd. Margaret was all smiles, shaking hands, quoting scripture, but her eyes kept darting to Elena, as if checking she was still there. Elena's suspicion grew. Her mother wasn't just hiding something, she was protecting something. But what? That afternoon, Elena found her chance. Margaret was at a church committee meeting, leaving the house empty. Elena slipped into her mother's study, a room she'd rarely entered. It was austere, with a wooden desk, a Bible, and a single framed photo of Elena as a child. She hesitated, guilt prickling her skin, but she needed answers. She opened the desk drawer, rifling through paper, sermon notes, church budgets, nothing unusual. Then, tucked beneath a stack of envelopes, she found a small worn journal. Her hand shook as she opened it. The pages were filled with Margaret's neat handwriting, dated years back. One entry from 10 years ago stopped Elena cold. They found out about Clara. The church called it an abomination. Pastor Reynolds said she'd burn if she didn't repent. I begged her to stay quiet to protect herself, but she wouldn't. She left town, and I'll never forgive myself for not standing with her. Clara. The name hit Elena like a wave. She'd heard it once or twice, a vague mention of a family friend who'd moved away when Elena was a teenager. But the journal painted a different story. Clara had been Margaret's best friend, maybe more. The entries grew more frantic, describing how the church had shunned Clara, how Pastor Reynolds had rallied the town against her. One line seared into Elena's mind: "I can't let them do to Elena what they did to Clara. I'll do whatever it takes to keep her safe." Elena's throat tightened. Her mother's hatred, her sermons, her coldness, it was all a lie. Margaret wasn't fighting Elena's love. She was fighting the church, shielding her daughter the only way she knew how. But at what cost? That night, Elena met Sophie at the creek, the journal burning a hole in her pocket. She told Sophie everything, her voice breaking as she read the entries aloud. Sophie listened, her face a mix of anger and sorrow. "Your mom's been carrying this for years," Sophie said, her voice low. "She's trying to save you, but she's tearing you apart in the process." Elena nodded, tears stinging her eyes. "I need to talk to her. I need her to know I'm not Clara. I'm not running." Sophie pulled her close, her lips brushing Elena's forehead. "Whatever you do, I'm with you. But this town, it's not safe, Elena. Not for us." The next day, Elena confronted Margaret. They stood in the kitchen, the same table where Elena had confessed her love for Sophie. "I found your journal," Elena said, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. "I know about Clara. I know why you're doing this." Margaret's face paled, her hands gripping the counter. "You had no right," she whispered, but there was no anger in her voice, only fear. "Mom, I'm not her. I'm not going to let the church chase me away. But I can't keep living like this, hiding who I am." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, a rare crack in her armor. "You don't understand, Elena. The church, they'll destroy you. They'll destroy us both. Then why are you helping them? Elena's voice rose raw with pain. Why are you pretending to hate me? Margaret sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. Because it's the only way I know to protect you, she whispered. If they think I'm one of them, they won't come after you. Not yet. Elena's heart ached. Her mother wasn't the enemy, she was a casualty, trapped by her own fear and guilt. But Elena couldn't live in that trap anymore. I love her, Mom, she said softly. And I'm not ashamed. Margaret looked up, her eyes searching Elena's face. For the first time, Elena saw not just fear but pride. You're braver than I ever was, Margaret said, her voice barely audible. But the moment was cut short. A knock at the door startled them both. Pastor Reynolds' voice called out, Margaret, we need to talk. It's about your daughter. Elena's blood ran cold as Pastor Reynolds' voice echoed through the door. Margaret's face hardened, the mask slipping back into place. Go to your room, she whispered, her voice urgent. Now. But Elena didn't move. She was done hiding. No, Mom. I'm not running from this. Margaret's eyes widened, a mix of fear and admiration flickering across her face. The knock came again, sharper this time. Margaret smoothed her dress, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Pastor Reynolds stood there, his tall frame filling the doorway, his face a storm cloud. Behind him were two church elders, their expressions grim. Margaret, Pastor Reynolds said, his voice low but commanding. We've heard troubling things about Elena, things that need addressing. Elena's stomach churned. She knew what this was. Someone had seen her with Sophie, maybe in the park, maybe at the creek. Willow Creek was a spiderweb. Nothing stayed secret for long. Margaret stepped forward, her voice steady. What are you implying, Pastor? Reynolds' eyes flicked to Elena, cold and assessing. There are rumors she's been keeping company with that girl Sophie Harper, the one who flaunts her defiance of God's law. Elena's heart pounded, but she stepped forward, meeting his gaze. Her name's Sophie and I love her. That's not a rumor. It's the truth. The room went silent. The elders gasped and Pastor Reynolds' face darkened. Margaret's hand twitched, as if she wanted to reach for Elena but couldn't. Elena, she said sharply, be quiet. But Elena was done with silence. No, Mom. I'm not ashamed of who I am. And I'm not afraid of him. She turned to Reynolds, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. You can't make me hate myself. Reynolds' eyes narrowed. You're young, Elena. Confused. But this path leads to ruin. We can help you, guide you back to righteousness. By shaming me? By threatening me? Elena's voice rose, raw and defiant. That's not love. That's control. Margaret stepped between them, her voice cutting through the tension. Pastor, this is a family matter. I'll handle it. Reynolds studied her, his lips thinning. See that you do, Margaret. The church won't tolerate this. Corruption. You know what's at stake. The threat hung in the air as he and the elders left. Margaret closed the door, her hands shaking. She turned to Elena, her face a mix of anger and fear. Do you have any idea what you've done? She whispered. They'll come for you now. They'll come for us both. Then let them, Elena said, her voice trembling but firm. I'm not Clara, Mom. I'm not leaving. Margaret's eyes filled with tears and for a moment she looked like she might break. But she straightened, her voice low. You don't know what they're capable of. I do. That night Elena met Sophie at the mill, the only place they felt safe. She told her about the confrontation, the journal, her mother's secret. Sophie's face hardened. Your mom's trying to protect you, but she's wrong. Hiding who you are, it's not living. It's surviving. Elena nodded, her heart heavy. I know. But I can't leave her, Sophie. Not until she's free too. Sophie's eyes softened, and she pulled Elena into a fierce embrace. Then we'll fight. Together. But we need a plan. They spent hours talking, plotting. Sophie wanted to leave Willow Creek, to start fresh somewhere no one knew them. But Elena couldn't abandon her mother, not when she was starting to understand the weight Margaret carried. They decided to confront the church, to expose its hypocrisy, but they needed proof, something to show the town what Pastor Reynolds was really doing. The next day, Elena returned to her mother's study, searching for more clues. She found another journal entry, this one recent. Reynolds is planning something. A cleansing for the town. I can't let him hurt her. I won't. Elena's heart raced. A cleansing? What did that mean? She remembered whispers from church meetings, vague mentions of saving the flock. She needed to know more, but confronting Reynolds directly was too dangerous. She needed an ally, someone inside the church who might talk. She thought of Mrs. Carter, an older woman who'd always been kind to her, who'd quietly disagreed with some of Reynolds' harsher sermons. Elena found her at the church bake sale, pulling her aside. Mrs. Carter, she whispered, I need your help. I think Pastor Reynolds is planning something bad for people like me. Mrs. Carter's face paled, but she nodded. I've heard things, she said softly. Meet me tomorrow at the old chapel. I'll tell you what I know. Elena left, hope flickering in her chest. But as she stepped outside, she saw Pastor Reynolds watching her from across the street, his eyes cold and unyielding. The old chapel smelled of dust and forgotten hymns, its stained glass windows casting fractured light across the pews. Elena met Mrs. Carter there at dawn, her heart pounding as the older woman's face confirmed her fears. Pastor Reynolds has been meeting with a few elders in secret, Mrs. Carter whispered, her voice trembling. They're calling it a purification. They want to root out anyone who doesn't fit their vision of righteousness. Elena's stomach twisted. What does that mean? What are they planning? Mrs. Carter hesitated, her eyes darting to the door. Public shaming may be worse. They've done it before, drove people out of town, ruined lives. Your mother. She knows more than she's letting on. Elena's mind raced. Margaret had been shielding her, but how deep did this go? She thanked Mrs. Carter and slipped out, her thoughts a storm of fear and determination. She needed to warn Sophie and confront her mother again. She found Sophie at the mill, her motorcycle parked outside. Sophie's face lit up when she saw Elena, but it darkened as Elena explained what Mrs. Carter had said. This isn't just about us anymore, Sophie said, her voice tight. They're targeting anyone who doesn't fit their mold. We need to stop them. Elena nodded, but her heart was heavy. My mom's involved somehow. I need to know why she's so scared. That evening, Elena waited until Margaret was alone in the kitchen. The air was thick with tension, the journal's revelations hanging between them. Mom, Elena said, her voice steady, I know about the purification. I know what Reynolds is planning. Why are you helping him? Margaret's face crumpled, and for the first time she didn't hide her pain. I'm not helping him, she said, her voice breaking. I'm trying to stop him. But I have to play along, Elena. If I don't, they'll come for you first. Elena's breath caught. What happened to Clara? What did they do to her? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Clara was everything to me, she whispered. We were young in love, but the church found out. Reynolds led the charge, public shaming, threats, lies about her family. They drove her out, Elena. I couldn't save her. I won't let that happen to you. Elena's heart ached, but anger burned through her grief. You're not saving me, Mom. You're trapping me. I can't live like this, pretending I'm someone I'm not. Margaret reached for her hand, her touch trembling. I know. I'm trying to find a way out. But Reynolds' dangerous. He has the town in his grip. Then we fight him, Elena said, her voice fierce. Together. Margaret hesitated, then nodded, a spark of resolve in her eyes. I have something, she said softly. Documents, recordings. Reynolds has been skimming church funds, using them to control people. If we can expose him, we can stop this. Elena's pulse quickened. Where are they? In my study, locked in the safe. But we need to be careful. If he finds out. They were interrupted by a crash outside. Elena ran to the window, her heart stopping as she saw flames licking the edge of the yard. Someone had thrown a Molotov cocktail. A warning scrawled in paint on the driveway. Repent or burn. Margaret pulled Elena back, her face pale but resolute. They know, she whispered. We're running out of time. Elena called Sophie, her hands shaking as she explained. Sophie was there in minutes, her motorcycle roaring into the driveway. We need those documents, Sophie said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. And we need to get you both out of here. They worked fast, retrieving the safe's contents, a stack of papers and a USB drive. Margaret's hands trembled as she handed them to Elena. "This is everything," she said. "Proof of his corruption, his threats. But if we use it, there's no going back." Elena nodded, her resolve hardening. "We're not going back." They planned to take the evidence to the local newspaper, hoping to expose Reynolds before he could act. But as they prepared to leave, headlights flashed through the window. A truck pulled up and Pastor Reynolds stepped out, flanked by two men. His voice carried through the night. "Margaret, we need to finish this." Elena's heart pounded as Pastor Reynolds' shadow loomed outside. Margaret grabbed her arm, her voice low. "Take the documents and go. Out the back. Now." "No," Elena said, her voice firm. "We face this together." Sophie stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "She's right. We're not running." Margaret hesitated, then nodded, a fire sparking in her eyes that Elena had never seen. They hid the documents in Elena's backpack and faced the door. Reynolds knocked again, his voice colder now. "Margaret, open the door. We know she's in there." Margaret opened it, standing tall. "What do you want, Pastor?" Reynolds' eyes flicked to Elena and Sophie, his lips curling. "Your daughter's lost her way, Margaret. And you failed to correct her. The church demands action." Margaret's voice was steel. "The church demands nothing. You're a fraud, Reynolds. I have proof." His face twitched, a crack in his composure. "You're making a mistake," he said, stepping closer. The men behind him shifted, their hands flexing. Elena's heart raced, but she stepped forward, holding up the USB drive. "It's over, Pastor. We have everything, your embezzlement, your threats. The town will know who you really are." Reynolds' eyes narrowed, but before he could speak, headlights flashed again. Mrs. Carter's car pulled up, followed by two others. She stepped out, her face resolute, joined by a handful of congregation members who'd grown tired of Reynolds' tyranny. "We've seen enough," Mrs. Carter said, her voice carrying. "You're done, Pastor." The men behind Reynolds hesitated, sensing the shift. He turned, his face red with fury. "You'll regret this," he spat, but his voice lacked conviction. Margaret stepped forward, her voice steady. "No, you will. For Clara. For my daughter. For everyone you've hurt." Reynolds backed away, his power crumbling. The next day, Elena and Sophie took the evidence to the newspaper. By evening, the story broke headlines exposing Reynolds' corruption, his secret deals, his campaign of fear. The town erupted, some in outrage, others in shame. The church fractured, but those who'd stood with Mrs. Carter began rebuilding, focusing on love, not judgment. Elena and Sophie stood in the park that night, the same place where their love had begun. The air was cool, the church bells silent for the first time in years. "We did it," Sophie whispered, her hand finding Elena's. Elena smiled, tears in her eyes. "Not just us. Mom too." Margaret had stayed behind, working with Mrs. Carter to reform the church. She'd apologized to Elena, her voice breaking as she admitted her fear, her guilt over Clara. "I thought I was protecting you," she'd said. "But you showed me what courage looks like." Elena squeezed Sophie's hand, her heart full. They weren't leaving Willow Creek, not yet. They'd fight for a town where love didn't have to hide, where no one had to pretend. The church's wrath had been fierce, but love, Elena realized, was fiercer. As the stars emerged, Sophie pulled Elena close, her lips brushing hers. "Ready for what's next?" she whispered. Elena nodded, her voice soft but sure. "Always." Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to get notifications about next videos.